Good evening, aviation enthusiasts. Welcome back to another episode of Ask an Ambassador, where tonight we cover the burning topic of test anxiety, which I just mispronounced text anxiety. So you can start making fun of me right up front. Pat does. You know, seriously, test anxiety is a real thing. It's especially prevalent in flight students when they're preparing for a knowledge test, their written tests, or a practical test, or a flight review, or a proficiency check, even a stage check. Anything where we can be tested, we tend to get a little testy. Hey, I've been there. I get it. But you don't have to get all nervous and queasy about the testing process. Tests matter. Yeah, you want to pass. You want to do well. You'd kind of like to pass with distinction. So you can tell people, hey, I got a 98, I got 100. But that's not really necessary. You don't have to get yourself so wrapped up. So to address this issue tonight, we will bring together the three Aviation Foundation ambassadors who between us have taken a metric ton of practical tests and written tests. And hey, we've even got the great and powerful Pat Brown. He's a designated pilot examiner. He knows everything on this topic. So let's get into it with our good friends, Pat Brown from down there in Tejas.
Hey.
Cave Sunrum from way over there in newly soggy California. And let's talk about test anxiety. Kay, how would you, oh, wait, I neglected to mention Rebecca. Rebecca Boone is in the background making all this stuff work. We can't deal with Donnie anymore. He's been shoved to the side. Rebecca now handles it. And by the way, we got Mike Ryan on the line. We got Archie Hubbard on YouTube. I'm thrilled to see you all. But Kay, how do you describe test anxiety? What is it from your perspective?
It's being really nervous about the task at hand or what is going to come to you in the future. And that anxiety can be mental, it can be physical, it can affect you emotionally. And so everyone reacts to anxiety differently. And sometimes it's about tests. It might be something else that's going on in life that is carrying over into your aviation world. So there's many different types of anxieties, but the way I look at test anxiety is just you're just nervous because it's a test. You might be 110% prepared to take that exam and you'll probably get 100, but you can still be nervous because you have this fear of failure. Or you feel like you may not be prepared enough. There could be a multitude of reasons, but you're just nervous about something, and that creates this feeling inside you. Your stomach is churning, or you're thinking about all the bad things, right? Are the consequences of what will happen if I fail this? Is it going to be the end of the world? It's all those negative thoughts. That's what I would define as anxiety. And it's
I remember when I was in flight school, there was a lot of people who would openly admit, I didn't really sleep last night before their check ride because you keep running over it in your head. Now, Pat, I was convinced as a young student that the designated pilot examiner had kind of a generic voodoo doll of a student that could poke with pins. You are a DPE in general, and I know it's not true of everybody, but do they enjoy torturing their applicants, or do they actually commiserate and try and make their life a little easier?
Oh, no, we love to torture them. No.
Good night.
Yeah, that's all for me, ladies and gentlemen. No, I'm kidding. No, absolutely not. I can't speak for everybody, but I can tell you that the vast majority that I know on a personal basis actually go out of their way to try to make the applicant feel as comfortable as possible in what is admittedly a high stress situation. There's no way that you can take all the nerves out of it. There's just not. But you know, you can take a few minutes before you actually start the test and before you ask for the ID and you start verifying the logbooks and all that kind of stuff. And just tell me about yourself. You know, you have brothers and sisters, or what do your parents do? Or, you know, depending obviously on the you know, if you don't want to ask a 60-year-old private pilot candidate what his parents do, they're probably dead. But you know, just trying to put them at ease a little bit and demystify that impression that that we've got horns in the tail, because it's not true. We really want the best for them. We truly do.
And I think we forget. I think I did when I was a student. Everybody in aviation has been through this. Every single one of us, whether you're a captain of a wide body, whether you're a DPE, whether you're a CFI, does not matter. You have experienced this firsthand. And, to your point, Kay, it's entirely self-induced, because whether it's a knowledge test or a stage check or a practical test or whatever, we're not going to be asked anything we haven't reviewed 100 times. But just that pilot type A personality, I want to do well. I don't want to screw up. I certainly don't want to have a brain fade and, not be able to answer a simple question. We put an enormous amount of pressure on ourselves unnecessarily, and not necessarily to our benefit. It's just not that great a deal. So,
Jamie, I want to add to that. Sometimes people think that, oh, I have this test anxiety because I'm not good enough, or I have a higher chance of failing. And that's not true. Even the people who were straight A's in college, who were good at taking tests, they get nervous too. It's a universal feeling of when you have to take a test, because you are being tested. So there is a potential for failure, and no one will want to fail at anything, right? We don't go out taking on tasks with the intention of failing and feeling bad. And so it is universal, and is by no means a reflection of whether you're truly prepared or not.
True.
Yeah. And, I get a kick out of this, because when I was researching this episode, and yes, we do research, we actually try to do a professional job. There is an Anxiety and Depression Association of America. That's a real thing. And they actually have studied testing anxiety, because it's not just pilots. It's, as you say, Kay, anybody who's trying to achieve something and setting a bar for themselves and they want to clear it. It all comes down to fear of failure, lack of preparation, and poor test history. It's probably worth discussing that. But, Pat, we all have something in our background where we took a test in the third grade and it didn't work out, and we cried and the class made fun of us, or the teacher said something. Somewhere back there, we have this fear of failure. I have this vision for what my life's going to be, and if I don't pass this test, it won't work.
Yeah, I've found that, in life, there are three types of people, those that are good in math and those that aren't. And mathematics for me was my Achilles heel, and I was horrible in math from third grade on, still am. And every time I had a math exam up through college, it was, I'm telling you, I would walk in and, palpable high blood pressure and cold sweats and all of that stuff. And, there's a stress hormone called cortisol. And if you look at this Depression and Anxiety Association, they probably talk about it there somewhere. But there's a stress hormone called cortisol, and essentially what that does is it turns your brain into mush. And what's a nice, well-oiled machine, and all of a sudden that's what happens when the cortisol starts to kick in. So finding a way to manage, knowing that in advance certainly is just powerful in itself. Just knowing that fact, that it's not unusual, and that is the result. But that just not knowledge can help you perhaps anticipate that this is normal, and maybe find some ways to mitigate that, which I'm assuming we'll talk about as we go along tonight.
Oh, you're expecting solutions, Mr. Brown? Okay, I see where this is going.
I'm looking to Kay for the solutions. I'm just pointing out the problem.
Well, yeah, Kay, this is the thing. This is all self-induced, and we get that fear of failure, that the world comes to an end if we don't do well on this test. And we do get a lot of that from teachers and parents and family and things as we go through life. But the reality is, if you fail it and fail it and fail it, you can keep coming back. And each time you have a better understanding, more knowledge, and eventually you clear the threshold. So really, it's not that big a deal, is it? I mean, if we could get ourselves in the mindset realizing I have an infinite number of chances, I don't have to rest all my hopes on this one.
And, failure it's a part of life. We learn from our mistakes, and there's you might have heard the saying: you fail early, you fail often, and you fail forward, right? And that's the key here too. We all make mistakes in our flight training and in flight and on the ground, and the key is to keep learning from those mistakes and fail forward. So if you do fail on a knowledge test, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of people who have, or they haven't done as well, and they can go back and take the written exam again. And the key is to focus on those weakness areas so that they are no longer weaknesses in the future.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Now, Pat, having been a poor math student who got all excited and sweaty and all that, do you think maybe that second component, that lack of preparation, affected you at somewhat? And do you see that in the aeronautical world where you've got a student, you've got an applicant, whatever, where people they have bad study habits. They don't prepare. They just show up and think, I'll do fine because I want to, instead of I'll do fine because I put a lot of effort into this.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a combination of things. For me, it was early on, I just didn't much like math, and because I didn't like it, I didn't like to study it, and because I didn't study it, I didn't do well. So it's that whole chain of events that eventually leads up to the accident. That I'm sure that's true, but it doesn't change the fact that I still don't like math.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I was a pretty solid D student in math, and somehow I became a success. I mean, well, we're grading on a curve here. Let's be honest. Kay, the poor test history is a thing. I mean, I was saved in high school because I can write. So I was a horrible student. I mean, class participation was fine, but everything in between was horrible until the essay at the end of the course. And then I'd go from a D to a B because okay, he was listening. What about, do you have any recommendation for somebody who's got a poor test history where they just haven't done well? As Pat says, the cortisol builds up, their brain turns to mush, they can't think, they get nervous. How do you overcome that? Or is there a way to overcome that, in your Californian opinion?
Yeah, I think it's important to have a mindset that whatever happened in the past is in the past, right? And what's out there in the future, we don't know yet, but focus on the present moment. And this goes back to being just mindful of where you are and what you're doing now, not what happened back then. I think you have to make a concerted effort to just put the past in the past. If you weren't good at test taking, or had those test taking skills, maybe you didn't have an opportunity to really learn how to take a test. There are some tricks, and some of it is maybe you were always the last one to finish and you ran out of time. Well, perhaps you were focusing too much on one question when you already knew the answer. You were trying to solve it to the third degree when you only needed to solve it to the whole number, then just move on. And so if someone told you that, hey, as soon as you get close to that answer, just answer and move on, that might have helped you finish the exam. So whatever the reasons were, it's in the past. So just forget about that and be mindful about being in the present moment. That's my biggest recommendation.
I'm with you. And I'll tell you, I wrote books and online courses for Gleim publications for a number of years. And it really did solidify something that I was told as a student, but it's true, especially with standardized tests. Slow yourself down, read the entire question and the entire answer of all three options, then pick a solution. Because left to my own devices, I'm heavily caffeinated. I'll zip through the question and miss something important. I'll see something that's true in one of the answers. I'll go, that's it. And no, that answer's partially true. And I missed a variable in the question. So it is a skill. Taking a test is a skill to learn how to calm down. And Pat, I suspect, and we've never talked about this, no rehearsal for this at all. It's totally live. I suspect if an applicant comes in and you ask them a question in the oral and they kind of take a big breath and look at the ceiling and exhale and take a few seconds to start to answer, you don't take points off. That's just how they're answering. You don't have to machine gun back the answer immediately. You can take a moment to think.
Yeah, and that's fine. I've had applicants who do just exactly that. In fact, it kind of reminds me when somebody on the news here in the States is on a satellite connection to somebody halfway across the world, and they ask a question, and there's always a 2 or 3 second delay before the other person responds, and you know what the reason is. It's got to bounce off 17 satellites or something like that. And it's actually a little bit unnerving from my standpoint with that kind of a delay, because I'm so expecting people to just jump right back into it, but it doesn't take long before you start to realize, okay, this is the rhythm of how things are going to go, and just factor that in. This person is actually thinking about what it is we're talking about before he or she spits out an answer. Good
yeah,
thing.
and I really was bad at this. I used to worry all the time that I had to have everything at my command. And one of the best experiences I ever had was in the oral for my instrument instructor. And I did it with this guy up in Gainesville, Florida, Dewey Oliver, who I'd never met before. He was absolutely great guy. But he asked me a question about NDBs, and I gave him an answer that was, from my perspective, correct. And Dewey kind of thought, and he says, "Are you sure about that?" I'm pretty sure. He's like, "When you get home, would you look that up and write me and let me know what that if that's true or not?" And I thought that was just the nicest way of saying that's not entirely right, but you're doing okay on this, so let's not panic about it.
Yeah.
But that worry, as I was saying in the beginning, Kay, where people don't sleep the night before, a little bit of being on edge is good because it keeps us alert, but an excessive amount really hurts. Have you ever found any kind of soothing method or distraction? Do you go to a movie? Do you go to the gym or something like that to help you deal with that sort of thing? Because, the three of us, we really have taken an enormous number of tests in our lives. And so far we've been passing.
For me, it's sleep. It is so important. Not just before a test. I am grouchy if I don't get enough sleep. Okay, I want at least 7 hours of sleep. 8 is wonderful. I don't usually get that, but I want 7 hours of sleep. Now, under 6, I'm not really that great of a person. Under 5, just walk away.
Yeah.
Just give me some space, because I'm not the regular case syndrome if I have 4 hours of sleep. And I
That's
also
why I live 2,000 miles from you, just in case.
No, you know what? In college, I don't know how I did that with 5 hours, especially grad school. But nowadays, no, I need that sleep. And particularly before really important events. It's not just tests, even big presentations or events where we have an important role to play. I want to get a good night's sleep. For me, that is the biggest thing. The other parts of it, and this is all, self-care is what it is. It's for me, it's sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I compromise any one of those three, then I don't function at my optimal level. Yes, I can wing it. I can get by. Maybe you might not even know, but I'll know afterwards because I'll feel it. And so I can be at my best when I have good amount of sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And for me, it's in that order.
My physique would not suggest I agree with you, but I do. So yeah, I'm not good at getting enough sleep. I never have been. I'm not good at getting enough exercise, but I try hard and I ache a lot. So I assume something is working. Pat, the worry thing, just it's a show of anxiety. And it really can get to the part where we just can't perform at all. And this memory sticks with me. I was on an instructional flight once where I was the student, and the instructor, the flight in front of me was a twin. It was a student going for their multi-private. And you have very little time in the airplane when you go for a multi-private generally. Very few hours.
Yeah.
And the tower cleared the twin in front of me to depart, and they just sat there. and there's a line of planes on the taxiway, and they cleared him again to taxi onto the runway and depart, and he just sat there. And they called back, and the examiner called back and said, we're just going to back taxi and get off the runway. But this poor guy was just so stressed that he couldn't figure out how to make the airplane move. Yeah. Do you ever see that in not names and things, but over the course of your career as an instructor, as a student, as a DPE, have you ever seen that where somebody has just wrapped themselves up so tightly in the anxiety, they just can't perform at all?
I haven't ever, I shouldn't say, not where, I mean, not to that extent for sure. I've seen things that happen that after they happen, and unfortunately after it becomes a disapproval, the person like, what was I thinking? I know better than to do that. You know, most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a ride, an instrument check ride, and we were being vectored to final on a GPS approach. And when the ATC guy cleared us for the approach, we weren't yet established on the inbound course. So what does the applicant do? He hits direct to the final approach fix. That's a no-no.
Yeah,
because you're not established on the approach at that point. And so unfortunately, you know, it didn't turn out well. And afterwards on the debrief, you know, it's like, what was that? I know not to do that. My instructor told me not to do that. I know not to do that, but it's in the heat of the moment. It's sometimes you just don't perform the way you know you're capable of performing.
Yeah, and you know the sad thing is, Kay, getting yourself all nervous and worked up does not lead to a better grade. Actually, it probably degrades your performance, if anything. Your 3 solutions, you know, sleep, exercise, nutrition, are really good advice. It's probably wise for anyone, I suspect, who's facing a testing process, whether it's aviation or medicine or law or whatever. If you're going to be going down this path, take Kay Sunrum's words to heart. Don't you think, Kay, perhaps you should do a self-help series of videos about this and get people on the right track? Because seriously, we've spent a lot of time studying. We've spent a lot of money on these courses. We put a lot of effort in. And if we get our anxiety up to the point where it actually degrades performance, we're not doing ourselves any favors.
Right. Now, a certain amount of fear is good, in the sense that it keeps you on your toes. You want to do things well. You want to do things on time. You want to do it correctly, and you don't want to be a superstar, right? And so that kind of a little bit of fear is good, but too much of it, like you said, Jamie, is counterproductive, and then you're not performing like you normally would.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kay. I find personally that a little anxiety, and that might not be the right word, but for me, I feel sharper. I think there's, you know, it might be adrenaline or I don't know what, but there's something about the pressure of a test coming up that at least up until now makes me feel more in the moment, aware, sharp, whatever the adjective may be, but too much of that, to your point, there's a point at which the curve will start back down again, and so the key is trying to figure out how to stop it up here and maintain it here for 3 or 4 hours or whatever you need to. But for me, I find that it focuses my attention, and things that I can remember vividly, things that I would forget on a routine basis preparing for a check ride, but on the check ride, they're there. And it's like, wow, that was a miracle.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes people's perception of people like us, aeronautical luminaries that we are, that, gee, they've never screwed up. And I got to admit, I've been in this business a good long time. I've never failed a check ride. I'm very proud of that. I've never failed a written test. I'm not saying I haven't made some colossal mistakes, because I have. But, I think I told this story once about I was on a 141 check ride once for school. I was flying with an FAA examiner, and he failed my engine right over the airport, like 5,000 feet right over the airport. And for reasons I could not tell you to this day, we're flying a PA-28, I pulled in all the flaps immediately. And it's like, I have no idea. Well, I'm at 5,000 feet. I don't need flaps. But, I took them out incrementally and lost altitude and landed. And as we were rolling out on the runway, I said, I have no idea why I did that. He goes, I wondered about that, but we were okay. So, I mean, but that's the thing. I think sometimes people look seriously at somebody like Kay with your education, or Pat, you're a DPE, and they say, wow, you guys are flawless. And the truth is, we're not. We're human beings. We make mistakes. We have lapses of memory. And it's not the end of the world. It's okay. You can, as long as you recover. And Pat, I'm gonna ask you this just for clarity. What you're looking for on a check ride is for the applicant to be the pilot in command, not to be the perfect pilot. Is that correct?
Yeah, when I'm doing the pre-flight briefing about what we're going to do, I tell them the reg 61.47 actually says that you're PIC. And I said, that stands for pilot in command, not passenger in crisis. And, and it makes them laugh a little bit, and maybe loosens the tension just a little bit, but it's true. I expect the applicant to fly the airplane like he or she is solo in the airplane, or has perhaps a significant other in the airplane. I tell them that they can ask me any questions that they want to at any time on the ground or in the air. I don't care. Ask me anything you want, anytime. If I can answer you, I will. And if I can't, the answer is going to be, you're the PIC. And a lot of times the question says, do you want me to do a clearing turn? You're the PIC. But the ACS clearly says clearing turns. Mm-hmm. So if you're not familiar with the ACS and you just go right into a steep turn or something like that, that's not a good thing.
Kay, that goes back to the preparation thing we talked about earlier. The great advantage of being involved in aviation is the aeronautical or airman certification standard exists. It's printed. You can get it for free online as a PDF. You can read, and as Pat says, you can see that there are things like clearing terms that are mandatory, or special areas of interest, or basically the whole test is there. The standard, plus or minus what do you have to fly. And even the knowledge test, there are all kinds of study aids out there to get you up to speed so that you can explain density altitude, and you don't really care about memorizing the correct answer. You understand the concept, but it really does all come down to preparation, don't you think?
Yes, you have a wealth of information out there that is there to help you succeed. Jamie, you mentioned the ACS. You should be really familiar with that book. And in fact, your instructor probably has those items pulled out and laminated, and they're using them. They'll show you ahead of time, hey, this is the standard that I'm going to be looking for right now the first time we do it. But the ultimate goal is that you'll be able to do the steep turn, maintaining altitude plus or minus X feet, and this bank angle and airspeed, and no power changes, or if you do, they're going to tell you what the limits are. And so you should be very accustomed to what those standards are. Now, if your instructor is not doing that, there's really a problem with the instructor, because he or she should be very familiar with the ACS, because that's what they're operating off of. So what I love about the aviation industry is that there's no surprises as to what the examiner is going to ask you. Your CFI has already gone through that material with you, and you should be sitting at home chair flying those items. And particularly as you get closer and closer to your exam, you want to mentally think about, all right, what are the items that I could be asked, and to what standards do I have to meet that? And then how do I do it? And sit there and mentally fly all of those, whether it's maneuvers or tasks do it at home, and the more you do it, the repetition is the mother of skill, right? Then that's the way we learn. We never get it right the first time around or the second time around. You think about how many landings you had to do to make a safe landing and then to make a really good landing. We had to practice it a lot. So utilize those resources.
Boy, you're not kidding. By the way, Martin Kastenbaum has opened the door to critiquing us. I can't believe he did this in public and everything. Evening all, for your information, the YouTube feed is not working tonight. We knew this, Martin, but because you were rude enough to point this out in public, now you have to tell us in the comments, what's your solution to anxiety when testing? And you know what? I'm going to extend that to your fellow viewers. Everybody should put that up. I think, that's like the drill instructor makes everybody else do the push-ups, Martin. That's where we are right now. I'm sorry. You opened the door and I'm just that mean.
Well, in all fairness, though, we thought it was working. We thought we had it fixed, and apparently we don't. So,
in defense, it would appear one of the gerbils died. So that's where we are. Hey, Pat, I was not a great test taker when I was young, as I said, but the thing that really helped me when I got to big time flight school is I went out and put together a study group with some of my neighbors, all flight students. They all lived in the same apartment complex. So there were about 5 or 6 of us that would get together almost every night in my apartment. And, Pat's in charge of meteorology and Kay's in charge of regulations and I'm in charge of systems. And we all became the subject matter expert in our area, which is a big confidence boost. I didn't really realize that at the time. But it also meant we had somebody to go to. We didn't have to randomly ask questions. We could do our own research, but we knew who to go to who really knows this subject. That did an enormous amount of good for me. And much like Kay has talked about chair flying in the past, where you can really prepare yourself for a check ride just in an office chair in your house. Have you ever done anything particularly as a study guide or a preparation method that you really thought helped you through the process over these many, many years?
Yeah, I don't want to think about how many years. You had to bring that up, didn't you, Jamie?
Well, it's because I'm so much younger than you.
Yeah, right. Well, I didn't go to a big time flight school. I did it all. It was pretty much Part 61 throughout my entire life. But what I found helpful was back when the FAA did publish the test question bank, and you can still get access to questions that are similar to what you actually find on the written test. But I always found it going through the line books, actually, and some of the others that were out there, and reading through the questions and with a yellow highlighter highlighting the correct answer. And then after going through that and doing that, and just go back and from a repetition standpoint, which is one of the laws of learning, repetition, and go back, and then I would start reading the questions as if they were statements, and ignoring the incorrect answers, going straight to the correct one. And I found that when I would sit for the test or take one of the practice tests that were online, that are still online, that you can find, just Google FAA practice test, you'll find a number of places that have them out. They're free, most of them. That if I went and looked for basically the statement that looked familiar, more often than not, that was right. And the other thing that I still employ when I have to take a test, because to maintain my DPE status, I have to take written tests several times a year, and it's one and done. If you fail it, you're out. I take a look at how many questions are there, and what percentage do I have to get right. And if I know that I've got to get, just arbitrarily, let's say I've got to get 20 questions right out of the bank of questions they're asking me, I will go through and I'll go question by question. Do I know this one? Yes. Am I pretty confident this one? Yes. Okay, mark that. That's one. And I'll keep doing that until I get to 20, where I'm reasonably sure that these are the right answers, or absolutely sure that these are the right answers. The test is now passed. If it's an 80, I've got an 80, that's fine. An 81 is wasted effort. Because the test is passed. Now, that philosophy isn't great for the written test that you're taking for your private, commercial, or instrument, because if you come to me with a 70, I'm going to look at that a little bit harder, perhaps, than if you come to me with an 85. But and what it'll also do is it will likely lengthen the duration of the oral, because I have to cover all of those things, even though your instructor is supposed to cover them as well. I have to cover them, which means if in the normal course of the check ride, I'm not already covering some of these things, which I do on a routine basis. There's some things that I just cover regardless. It means that I've got to ask additional questions or present different scenarios or things like that to make sure that that's taken care of. But but I think a helpful strategy is figure out how many questions do you have to get right in order to be at least pass the test. And once you get to that number, I think it's something like 42 questions out of 60 is a 70%, maybe might be 47, I don't remember. But once you get to that number, the test is passed. Now let me go back and look at the ones that I've got to read a chart or look at an approach plate or do some calculations or something along those lines, and then shoot for the highest grade that you can possibly get. But let's get the test passed first, and then go back and work the rest of it out. So for me, that's always been a good strategy.
That is very good advice. And hats off to Martin, who has come through, says, I've only had 2 check rides so far. For me, the anticipatory anxiety was far worse than the actual event. Once there, it was much more relaxed. I think that's a universal experience, that we get there and we're all bunched up and our stomach is gurgling and we didn't sleep well and we're nervous. And then we find out our DPE is actually a pretty nice individual. And it's a pretty day out, and we actually enjoy flying and talking about airplanes, which is how we got into this in the first place. So it's really not that bad. But we're talking a lot about preparation. And Kay, I think it is important that we talk about preparation in a real way. Provide some advice for people so that as they go along, they go, I heard some funny stories, but I actually got some actionable stuff. How about efficiency? You've talked about chair flying in the past. What do you think the big benefit of that is? And is there any downside to chair flying?
You save a lot of time by chair flying. For example, if you are focused on emergency procedures, right? And we always want to start off with flows before we whip out our POH or our checklist. We should have those main items memorized, right? Well, sit in the cockpit. That would be the best thing to do. Sit in the cockpit and review that information and go through the flows. If it's fuel shutoff valve on both, actually move your hand down to where the fuel shutoff valve is and pretend like it's there and pretend like you're switching it, because things do take, a split second here and there. And so you want to go through the motions in real time and speak out loud when it's appropriate. If you're going to do that in flight, then speak out loud when you're chair flying. So make it as realistic as possible. And, if somebody's walking down the flight line and they see you sitting there by yourself, moving your hands and talking, they might think, well, what is he or she doing? Let them be amused. This will benefit you, because the more we practice those flows, the better we're going to be at it. And when we need to use those emergency procedures, it's going to click. You're going to retain that information. If someone just tells you something and you hear it, you might retain maybe 15, 20% of it. But then if you say it out loud, you're more likely to retain more of it. And then if you do it, it's going to stick with you longer. So this is where that chair flying is really important, and make it as realistic as possible. If you can only be at home that day, then yes, do it in your chair. But if you can actually get out to the airport and sit in the airplane that you're going to fly, then I recommend that you do that, because it's more realistic. Now, the drawback of that is it is by no means a substitution for a good chunk of your flight training. It is just to supplement it, and it's free. You don't even need to have an instructor there. Actually, you shouldn't. If you're going to take advantage of a lot of chair flying, you should be doing it by yourself. Then you can also go at your own pace. So have that actual checklist that you use in front of you and go through those motions. So that's more preparation for the flight test. But as far as the ground test, it's about getting those books out and practicing those questions. And being prepared is it takes time. They say that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. You've probably heard that before. It is so true. The more you prepare for those knowledge tests, and that just comes with uh, putting the time in and practicing the questions, then the more likely you're going to have a higher score. It's preparation, preparation, preparation.
Well, you're absolutely correct. But Pat, some of this stuff, I hate to say this, it's a little on the dry side. For instance, I know one person who enjoys reading the regulations. Fortunately, he's on this broadcast with us, but
He is on
there's
this broadcast.
well, there's also the calculations, time, speed, and distance, takeoff distance, landing distance. I was just working with a group of a half dozen high school kids talking about weight and balance, and it's really easy to get them to glaze over. So I printed out weight and balance sheets for a specific airplane and gave it all to them and told them they were flying. So they're all different weights. So they can't cheat off each other. They have to actually do it. But the more you do that sort of thing, the more you talk to other people about the regulations and review them to make sure you're right. Don't listen to your uncle from down at the Texaco. Actually look it up.
Yeah.
The more confident you are when you go into that test. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, we're hamstrung a little bit because the FAR aim, the index in the FAR aim isn't what I would consider to be the best index in the world. And there are things that that occasionally an applicant will have to look up. Frankly, frequently on a check ride, if an applicant doesn't reach for the FAR aim 2 or 3 times during our conversation, then they are regulatory savants, because I will ask questions or things like or propose a scenario that I know is going to drive them to the regs, because I want to know if they can figure out how to find something other than using Google, because in the real world, while Google is our go-to thing most of the time, there will be times that it's not available. So can they find something using good old-fashioned paper, or even a searchable copy of their FAR aim on the tablet? And I for now forgotten my train of thought. But basically, if they know where to find it, it's more important than knowing it right off the top of your head. In many cases, that is not universally true, but in many cases, if you know where to find it, that's the important thing.
I think you just brought up one of the most important testing topics for anyone involved in aviation. And Kay, I have to be honest, I had no idea as a private or an instrument student that I could open up the FARs to answer a question. I thought I had to have it all memorized, and I made myself miserable. Later on, by the time I got commercial and CFI, I realized these are kind of open book tests. The reference material is there. You can use it. Did you have any idea you were allowed to do that when you started out? And what kind of a revelatory experience was it when you realized, oh, I'm allowed to use the reference material the FAA gives me?
During my training, my instructor was very, very good about making sure that I was actually looking up things. The POH, that was one that was just drilled in my head from as a student pilot, to really know that POH well. Now, I'm not talking about reading every single word like in the supplemental handling and all of that, but in the first half of the book, we should be really comfortable with it, with the general limitations, emergency procedures, and normal procedures, right? Section 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so my instructor was keen on me looking it up. So when we're covering, let's just say, the mag drop, all right? Well, what's the maximum mag drop? What's a differential? If you forget in that particular airplane, you should know, all right, I'm going to go to the normal procedures and I'm going to look it up. Because is it 125 and 50 or is it 125 and 75? Well, as long as you can go to the POH and say, hey, every airplane is slightly different. I'm pretty sure it's 50, but I'm going to check, and this is where I would do that. And so with that attitude that my instructor instilled in me as a student pilot, I kind of carried that throughout my flying career, and I emphasize that with my students, you won't always know the answers, particularly when you're flying multiple different airplanes. You're not expected to memorize everything, but you should know where to go and take a look. And if that POH of your copy of it is brand new and has never been opened up, that's a
Mhm.
problem by itself, because you really should be comfortable with not just the ACS, but also the POH for your airplane.
Speaking of comfort, viewers might notice we're all in the same office pretty much whenever we do these. And that's our comfort zone. That's where we work and we do the bulk of what we do, at least in the office sense. Studying is the same. If we have a place that's quiet, where we can focus, where we can be comfortable and study, we're more likely to be successful than if I do some studying on the bus and I do some studying while I'm at the grocery store and I do some studying at the FBO, and maybe I'll do some at home, but in the kitchen while people are doing things. Pat, has this ever been something that you've put conscious thought into, that you try to have a quiet, comfortable place to work, or is this something you just stumbled on in life?
It certainly is not conscious. I mean, today when I have to prepare for, one of these written tests that I talked about earlier, I'm basically where you see me here, looking at the big computer screen, which is over here. And I might even have another computer open on my desk, depending what it is I'm doing. But that's just kind of what I found works for me. I had horrible study habits in college, and probably equally horrible study habits in high school, but somehow muddled through. And to this day, seem to somehow figure out how to do it and muddle through life.
I like it. Kay, we had talked earlier about how we get all wrapped up in, fear of failure. But, this makes me think back when my kids were small and I used to coach baseball and softball for my son and my daughters. And it's an incredibly simple game. Before the pitcher throws the ball, you have to think about, what am I going to do if the ball comes to me? And what am I going to do if the ball goes to somebody else? And that's the only two courses of action. When we get into testing, rather than getting all bunched up, we might just look at it as, what happens if I don't pass the knowledge test? What do I do then? Or what happens if I don't pass the practical test? Let me go to you for the knowledge test part, Kay. What are our options? If I go and I get a 68 and that's not good enough, I needed a 70. Am I out of the game? Is that it for me? I'm not flying anymore?
Absolutely not. You have the opportunity to figure out, well, what areas do you need to work on, because every area has a subject code, right? So you'll know not the question that you got wrong, but you'll know the subject area that you got wrong. And then your CFI is required to go over that information with you and then sign you off again before you go back and take the knowledge test. So you'll know, okay, it's the aerodynamics. I got three of the questions or six of the questions wrong in this area, then you will definitely be spending a lot of time on the aerodynamics. And so you'll have an opportunity to spend more time, and the intent is to give you another shot at it. And so it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, and it's not always because you're ill prepared either. Or in the early 2000s, the FAA, in reaction to some events in the world, added a whole bunch of questions on icing. And people weren't used to getting a lot of icing questions, but suddenly you'd get some. And you may get some you don't expect. I actually had, on my instrument and my instructor written, both times, I had 2 helicopter questions. Now, at the time, I knew zero about helicopters. I'm confident I got those wrong. You can't let it shake you up. Move on to the other stuff. Pat, if I were to come to you for a practical test, very unlikely because we live well over 1,000 miles apart. But let's say your reputation is so stellar, I schedule with you specifically, and I just don't perform well. I have a bad day. I don't do clearing turns. I stall it on landing or whatever. What's going to happen? Do you write a letter to the FAA and say, this guy's horrible, don't let him fly? Or do I have another avenue?
Well, it's not quite that extreme, but the applicant, and I make a point of telling the applicant this. I can't speak for anybody else, but There are three ways that a check ride can end, and this is basically what I tell them. Number one is we have a temporary certificate. I walk into every check ride expecting that it's going to be successful. This is no different. And assuming it is successful, you're going to walk out of here with a temporary certificate and everybody's going to be happy. However, you get sick, I get sick, the airplane won't start, the weather comes down on us, the winds get too strong, whatever, and you don't want to fly, you can call it discontinuance. And what most applicants don't realize is that they have the power to call a discontinuance, even in the middle of the flight. If they're having a hard time and things aren't just not going well, and I haven't yet said, let's go back to the airport, the applicant can say, you know something, I'm not flying as well as I know I'm capable of doing. Can we just do a discontinuance and try it again later? My answer will be absolutely. You know, I'm not going to force that person to continue flying when he or she knows that they're not flying the best. So an applicant can call a discontinuance, and I can too. But typically, I don't call it discontinuance because it's their choice whether to fly in strong winds or bad weather or what have you. The third one is not the applicant's choice; it's a disapproval, and that one is my call. And there's no argument at that point. Once I say the check ride is over, it's over. And I do encourage them, and this part is their call. I do encourage them, depending on when this happens, is let's keep going and get as much done as we possibly can that's within the standards so that we only have to come back and repeat the stuff that you might have had a problem with. And for the most part, they will say, yeah, okay, let's do that. And in fact, when a disapproval happens, we do continue, for the most part, continue. I've had a couple of people I've had one person ask me, said, you got to fly the airplane back to the airport for me. I can't fly anymore. Wow. So I had to fly the airplane back and land and do the tower work and all that other kind of stuff. I had one applicant start crying in the cockpit because he had set his expectations so high, and he'd had family and friends waiting at the airport for him for the completion of a successful check ride. He put so much pressure on himself, he just couldn't perform. And so, you know, we don't want disapprovals. We really don't. I mean, it costs me additional time. I've got to come back now and re-examine this person, and we're so backed up in on our calendars for check rides. That's wasted time to have to go back and re-examine somebody because they weren't prepared. So we don't want a disapproval, but if they don't fly according to standards, there's really no choice in the matter. But those are the three ways that things can end. But if somebody has the foresight to say, you know something, I'm just not doing really well, I want to discontinue, that's fine.
You know, that's really interesting that you bring that up, where people put that much pressure on themselves. And it brings me to mind with that experience I had with the fella in the twin on the check ride who just couldn't move. They set their standards so high, they just got to where they couldn't function at all. And that's unfortunate. But, you know, the longer you're in this business, and maybe it's advantageous to have few years on us, you have experiences and you realize perfection really isn't the goal, which is what I thought early on. You know, I was doing one of those 141 check rides when I flew for a 141 school once. I was flying in a 152, and it's an FAA examiner. So he asks me to do a power on stall and teach it to him, and I did. And he said, well, that's okay, but try it like this. And he does a power on stall and recovery and says, now, did you see what I did there? And he does it again. And he says, now watch one more time, because we're going to, and as he goes into the fourth stall, he spins it inadvertently. And he recovers the airplane, and he says, well, the reason that happened is because we had done 4 stalls in a row. We had stored up so much stall energy, the aircraft had to spin, and I'm sticking with that. And I knew I passed the ride. But the point being, you get that thing. I've made mistakes in the plane. They make mistakes in the aircraft, and it's okay. We're not seeking perfection, Kay. We're seeking pilot and command responsibility, good decision making. And, you know, to Pat's point, I might even set myself up for a maneuver, and then as I start to enter it, I see a big flock of birds that has flown into my path. I can break off. And I've actually done this on a check ride where I've told the examiner, for safety reasons, we're breaking off here. We're going to start again. And the examiner's like, okay, that's fine.
Well, that's good judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
that's the
exercising
thing, though.
good
Is it?
aeronautical decision making.
We're
But
looking
it's
for judgment, not perfection.
Yeah, but it's important you better have a good reason for breaking off a maneuver in mid-flight, because we can't allow second chances. So, but having said that, there are always mitigating circumstances. You roll into a steep turn and, there's a flock of buzzards over here. We're not going to fly through the buzzards and just hope that they, that they disperse. That ain't going to happen. So, whoops, there's some buzzards. Okay, that's fine. I'll give you another good example. The 180-degree accuracy landing required by the commercial ACS. That's a one-and-done maneuver. There's no going around on that unless, and there's actual guidance on this that we got recently written down by the FAA that says that it's a one-and-done maneuver. However, if there's a circumstance that puts the success of the maneuver in jeopardy because of safety factors, for example, a car or a deer or something runs out on the runway, or an airplane, it pulls out in front of you, or you run into a flock of birds or something along those lines, where the safety of the maneuver is in doubt because of circumstances beyond your control, then okay, great, a go around is absolutely required. However, if you put us in a position where the safety of the maneuver is in question, or we're going to be short, or obviously we're going to be too long, then the FAA looks at that as you don't have sufficient skill to do this maneuver, and that is not allowed as far as the go around goes. So you have to be really careful about, in a testing scenario, you better have a good reason for breaking off a maneuver to reset.
That's such a mindset thing. Okay, I remember someone when I was in flight school, they had blown a maneuver and told the examiner, that wasn't right, I'll do it again. And the examiner's like, no, it's not best 2 out of 3. This is a test. And the kid was just totally gobsmacked. He's like, what do you mean? I can't keep trying it until I get it right.
Yeah.
We have to have the correct mindset going in, that, back to where we talked about the ACS or the test database, that for the written we can see. We've got to know what it is we're being tested on, and that can lower our anxiety because we now know we're not supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to show good judgment. We're not getting 3 tries at something. We're going to do it once. So take your time and set yourself up. If the examiner says, I want to see a power on stall, they don't mean immediately. They mean, I want to see you set up to safely do a power on stall and recovery. So take your time. Go ahead and do it. Don't rush into things. And maybe, Kay, that's why it's such a self-induced problem, this test anxiety, because not only are we worrying about the maneuvers or the testing question database, but we're just not entirely sure what it is that's expected of us. And that nebulous thought process leads us to just perform poorly.
And to add to that comment is sometimes we know what the standards are, but then we add these unrealistic standards on top of that, and that's a disservice. Know what the ACS says and aim for that. Don't add additional standards on top of that. Let your instructor decide on what is up to par. It is a disservice to just try to be perfect or set these unrealistic goals for yourself.
And Pat, I'm going to give you a little bit of applause, a little bit of a golf clap there for that highlighter thing, because I think many people misunderstand the test books, that they're trying to memorize a question and an answer verbatim. I always tell people to buy that book and go through with a highlighter, highlight the question and the correct answer. Because if it's not a calculation question, that's a true statement from the FAA. Those are not, when I worked at Gleim, there was no personal opinion in there. There was nothing that we embellished. It's all straight from the FAA. So really, you're creating yourself a very high quality study guide where you're not worried about memorizing the actual words. You're understanding the concept. So when you can explain not only why that's the correct answer, but why these other 2 are wrong, now you're ready to take the test. And that's great advice. I appreciate you throwing that out there, Pat.
Yeah, if you look at it, if you look at them, and not the calculation ones, but if you look at the others and look at them and learn them as statements, and forget the fact that it's a question, look at it in terms of becoming familiar with this statement. And at that point, I would not necessarily take an issue with what you said about knowing why this is right and those are wrong. But when you study like that, certainly you're picking up important pieces of knowledge that hopefully are going to stay with you, but you're really kind of learning it from a rote standpoint at that point.
Yeah.
This is a correct statement. Right now, I don't care why, that's a correct statement. And that will get you through the test. Now, that hopefully that knowledge will stay with you, and as you go through your training, you'll begin to understand why that's the correct question if you don't already understand it. But when I was studying, and when I do study for these kind of things, I'm not as concerned about understanding the why. Frankly, I want to pass the test. And then I'll get to the point where I'll dig into the why if I need to. And that may sound like a cop out or a shortcut. I don't believe it is. But for me, that has always worked the best.
I like it. And I'm going to close this out with my own personal advice. One of the things I've found people often get wrong on the knowledge tests is there are calculations for distance. You do the cross-country thing, and they give you the sectional chart parts. Your plotter is wrong. That is intentionally printed to a different scale. And if you use your plotter, you're going to be wrong every time. There's a scale printed on that thing. So take a blank piece of paper and a pen and make your own scale and measure the distances. You're going to do better on the written test because you didn't get faked out by the first thing, which is calibrate your plotter to the map. And when you realize it's wrong, make your own. You're welcome. There's a little extra bonus.
Hey, before we go,
yes,
Randy Settergren just sent us a note that says, do you need to play guitar to be an ambassador?
And I believe you do.
You haven't done it yet. No, but you either need to play guitar or have a son, Kay, who plays guitar.
Yes. Okay. That counts. Great.
I was going to say, I was online with your son last night going over how to play things. So
I know he enjoyed it very much. A
musical instrument in the house is an absolute requirement. So
in the near future, there might be a guitar back here. Yeah. Or ukulele.
Yeah, next time you need to have the guitar in the background.
I realize this looks like a music store, but it's not. It's my office. So there. We will be back on Tuesday, January 24th, because we really enjoy doing this sort of thing, and because people like Randy and Martin are online, and we appreciate you being there. We have to thank Rebecca Boone, who has done an absolutely spectacular job tonight with some significant technical issues as headwinds. That woman's making things happen. Mike Lovin, thank you very much for the compliment. Any parting words, Kay?
Fail early, fail often, and fail forward.
I like that. Would you like to say some wise Texas kind of thing, Pat?
Well, I'm not nearly as pithy as Kay is, but I would just simply say, we talked about this earlier, and perfection is not the standard. When you go to a check ride, a private pilot check ride, for example, you probably have something less than 100 hours, probably 60, 70 hours, maybe, if you're kind of in the general ballpark average. You're not going to fly like a 10,000-hour pilot. It's not fair for us to expect you to fly like a 10,000-hour pilot because you're not going to. And the standards are written with that in mind. So perfection is not the standard. If you goof up, acknowledge it, fix it, and move on. And you can goof up during a maneuver if you recognize it and fix it before you complete the maneuver, depending on what it is and circumstances. But just because you might make a mistake during maneuver doesn't mean that it's over. So,
I like it. Yeah, it all comes down to keep trying, try again when it doesn't work out, and eventually it will. And that's not just flying. That's everything in life.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching, y'all. I do appreciate it. We'll be back here on the 24th. To my great partners, Pat Brown and Kay Sundrum, I say thank you for making me look functional. And to Rebecca, thank you for keeping us on the air. Y'all have a wonderful night, and I will see you on January 24th.
Good
Bye
night.
bye, y'all.